Every road holds a story. What you're about to hear really happened. The trail wasn't supposed to be difficult. That's what everyone had told me. Just follow the markers, they said. You'll be fine. But Patagonia has a way of humbling you. The silence, the endless sky, the kind of wind that feels like it could erase you from the world if it wanted to. It was my third day hiking alone through the Rio Turbio region. I hadn't seen another person in almost 24 hours. Just me, the gravel trail, and the sound of my boots on the dirt. Around noon, clouds rolled in fast, thick, gray, and low, swallowing the horizon. I stopped by a small ridge to drink water when I saw it. A backpack, half buried in the sand, as if the wind had tried to claim it. T was an old, faded red pack. The straps were frayed, the fabric stiff with dust. No one would have noticed it if they weren't looking closely. But something about it, the way it sat there, perfectly upright, like it had just been set down, made me stop. At first, I thought someone had left it behind, maybe a hiker gone ahead. But when I called out, my voice bounced back emptily across the canyon. I waited. Nothing. Finally, I knelt down and brushed off the sand. The zipper was half open. Inside, there were a few things. A torn jacket, a notebook, and a camera with a cracked screen. No wallet. No phone. No name. Just a notebook with the initials EM written on the inside cover. I sat on a flat rock and opened it. The first few pages were simple. Notes about the trail, small sketches of mountains, weather updates, distances between campsites. Then, halfway through, the handwriting changed, messier, less controlled. Lost the trail near Laguna Azul, camped by the ridge. Food running low. Wine took the tent. If I find the path tomorrow, I'll make it back. The last page stopped mid-sentence, just for words written in shaky lines. Still heading south tomorrow. And that was it. For a while, I just sat there, holding the notebook. The air had gone still, even the wind seemed to stop reading. I looked around, trying to see if there were signs of anyone. A campsite, boot prints, anything. But the land was clean, untouched. Whatever had happened here had happened a long time ago. Still, the bag didn't look ancient. The material hadn't cracked. The ink in the notebook wasn't washed out. It felt recent. To recent. I debated taking it back to town, but something about the notebook felt personal, like it belonged to the trail itself. Instead, I carried it with me for the rest of the hike, tucked carefully inside my own pack. It felt heavier than it should have, not from weight, but from presence. Every time the wind picked up, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Every time I stopped, I half expected someone to come around the bend, asking if I'd seen a red backpack, but no one came. By late afternoon, the clouds had thickened into a gray ceiling that pressed low against the peaks. The air felt heavy, not with rain, but with distance. Every sound seemed to stretch, echo, and vanish before coming back. I followed the trail as best I could, but Patagonia doesn't care much for human markers. One gust of wind and even the most obvious path can disappear. Still, something in that notebook kept tugging at me, still heading south tomorrow. The words were more than a note, they were a direction, so I went south. About 2 kilometers from where I'd found the backpack, I noticed a small cluster of stones, stacked deliberately, not natural, not random. Someone had left them there. Next to them, half hidden under dry grass, was a piece of faded blue fabric, part of a tent, torn clean in two. I crouched down. The ground was hard, packed with wind and dust. No footprints, no gear, no remains, just this one small trace of presence. Proof that someone had tried to make camp here, and failed. That night, I camped nearby. The wind was fierce, constant, unrelenting. The kind that made the tent shudder and moan like it was alive. I lit my small stove and ate the last of my rice and beans. But I couldn't shake the image of that last line in the notebook, still heading south tomorrow. It wasn't just a plan, it was a promise. Someone had written it believing they'd wake up to keep walking. I stared out at the darkness, where the mountains were just shapes in a void, and wondered what that person had seen when they realized there was no tomorrow left. Around midnight, the wind changed. It came sharp and cold from the east, and the sound shifted, low, constant, like a distant hum. At first, I thought it was thunder. Then I saw the light. Far in the distance, a single flicker. Not lightning, not fire, but a steady, deliberate glow. Someone's campfire. I stepped out of the tent, my breath fogging instantly, and for a long moment, I stood there staring toward that faint orange pulse. Then it went out. When I woke, the storm had passed. The world was washed clean, sky blindingly blue, mountains sharp and clear against the horizon. I packed my things and followed the ridge toward where I'd seen the light. After an hour of hiking, I found a small clearing where the grass was flattened in a perfect circle. In the center, a pile of stones, blackened by fire. And beside them, half buried in the dirt, a metal cup. Old, dented, initials scratched faintly into the side, "M." The clearing was silent, the kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from absence. The grass had grown back unevenly, and the circle where the fire once burned was surrounded by small stones, black and smooth by heat and time. I crouched beside the ashes. They were cold now, long settled. But when I brushed my fingers over them, a faint smell of smoke still clung to the dirt. It was as if the place remembered. I set my pack down and took out the notebook. The pages trembled slightly in the wind, and as I read through them again, I noticed something I hadn't before. On the inside of the back cover, scribbled faintly in pencil, were coordinates. They were only a few kilometers south. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to leave it alone, to respect whatever story had ended here, but curiosity has its own gravity. And I'd come this far, so I followed the coordinates. The path led me down into a shallow valley where the wind softened and the light turned gold. The landscape opened wide, endless grass, scattered rocks, and the sound of a distant river threading through it all. Then I saw it, a small cairn, a stack of stones, carefully balanced, like a marker. Someone had built it with intent. At its base lay a rusted tin water bottle and a folded piece of fabric, the same color as the tent I'd found earlier. I knelt down. The tin was empty, but the fabric, wrapped inside, was a small piece of paper, folded so many times it was almost smooth. I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was rough, but still legible. "If anyone finds this, tell them I made it here. The map was wrong, but the river is real. It sounds like home." No signature, just those same initials, DM. I sat there for a long time, the wine pressing gently against my back, the river whispering somewhere below. There was no sadness in the words, no fear, no panic, just quiet acceptance. It felt less like a final message, and more like someone saying goodbye on their own terms. I followed the sound until I reached it. A narrow stream cutting through the valley, clear and cold, moving fast over smooth stones. I filled my bottle and sat by the edge. The sunlight bounced off the water, and for the first time in days, I felt calm. I don't know how long I stayed there. Maybe an hour, maybe more. Eventually, I placed the note back inside the fabric, folded it carefully, and tucked it beneath the same cairn. Not as a grave, not as a memorial, just as proof that someone had been here, and that someone else had cared enough to find them. By the time I left the river, the sun was already dipping behind the mountains. The wind had gone quiet, the light turning that soft, endless gold that Patagonia seems to keep just for itself. I walked slowly, tracing my steps back up the ridge. The notebook pressed against my chest, as if holding it closer could somehow keep the story alive a little longer. When I reached the place where I'd found the backpack, I hesitated. The sky was streaked with orange, and the world around me was utterly still. I set the red backpack upright, brushed the dust from its surface, and placed the notebook inside, gently, like returning something sacred. Then I whispered, "You made it south." 2 days later, I reached the small town of Chaltén. It was quiet that morning, shops still closed, hikers scattered like ghosts with coffee cups and maps. I went straight to the ranger's office, the kind of place where the air smells like paper, dust, and damp gear. A woman behind the desk looked up when I walked in. I told her what I'd found, the backpack, the notebook, the initials. She didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said, Yes. We had a report years ago. American hiker, he went missing on the southern route near Rio Turbio. We never found him." She opened a drawer and pulled out a faded file. A single photograph, grainy but clear enough. A man with a beard, smiling awkwardly into the camera. Behind him, the same mountains I'd just walked through. I stood there, staring at his face, feeling both the weight of what I'd found and the strange peace that came with knowing The ranger closed the file. You brought him home, in a way, she said softly. That night, I sat outside my hostel with a small cup of mate. The town lights flickering below, and the mountains watching silently from the distance. I thought about him, about Em, about how he must have walked those same trails, seen the same sky, heard the same wind, and how, in the end, his story hadn't disappeared. It had just been waiting for someone to find it. I took out my own notebook and wrote. Some journeys end long before we realize it. Others keep walking without us. Then I closed the page, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I'd arrived somewhere. Not a destination, but an understanding. A few months later, I received an email from the ranger in Chaltén. She'd managed to contact the family of Em in Oregon. They wanted to thank whoever had found the notebook and returned it. Attached was a short message from his sister. He always said he wanted to see the end of the road. Not to conquer it, but to listen to it. He must have found it down there. Thank you for helping him finish his story. I read that line over and over. There was something so human in it, how we all, in some quiet way, want our stories to reach a safe place to rest. The next year, I went back, not to chase ghosts, just to walk. The path looked different now, the grass taller, the wind softer, the ridge less cruel. When I reached the clearing, I saw that the red backpack was gone. The rangers must have taken it, but the cairn by the river was still there. Its stones stacked neatly, and touched. I added one more. Not as a marker, just as a whisper thank you. Then I stood for a while, listening, the same endless sound of the wind moving through the valley. The same river threading its way toward the horizon, and somewhere in that sound, I thought I heard it again, still heading south tomorrow. That phrase had haunted me for months. Now, standing there, I finally understood what it meant. It wasn't about direction, it was about persistence. About moving forward, even when you know the map ends. About trusting that the road continues, somewhere beyond what you can see. Maybe that's why we travel, not to find something new, but to find proof that we're still moving, even when someone else's story stops. As I turned to leave, the sky opened wide above me. No clouds, just a perfect, endless blue. The kind that makes you feel both small and infinite. I took a deep breath and whispered to the empty trail. Rest easy, Em, you made it south. Then I started walking, each step lighter than the one before. As if the wind had lifted some part of his story off my shoulders and carried it home. The river glimmered in the distance, and for the first time, I didn't look back. Because some journeys aren't about finding someone else. They're about discovering that you've been found too. Out there, somewhere between loss and belonging, in a place the map forgot to name. A few weeks after coming home, I emptied my backpack for the first time in months. Old maps, a cracked compass, ticket stubs from half-forgotten buses, the usual artifacts of a trip that already felt like a dream. But tucked deep in the side pocket, I found something I hadn't packed, a photograph. It was small, sun-faded, edges curled with time. A man, no doubt, standing beside a tent, smiling awkwardly at the camera. And next to him, just at the edge of the frame, a woman's shadow stretched across the ground. On the back of the photo, written in his unmistakable handwriting, Patagonia, last camp, the wind never stops. I turned it over in my hands again and again. The ink almost gone, but the feeling still there. As if the picture had been waiting to be found. Maybe it had fallen from the notebook. Or maybe the rangers had slipped it inside when they returned my pack. Or maybe, I thought with a small, quiet smile, some stories simply find their own way to stay with you. Months passed, and I kept the photo pinned to my wall. A reminder not of loss, but of presence, of what it means to be found. Every now and then, when I feel stuck, when life feels too loud, too rushed, I look at that picture and remember the valley, the river, the silence, and I remind myself, we are all heading south, in our own way. We're all trying to reach some unseen shore. To listen to the wind and understand what it's saying. Em's story ended in Patagonia. Mine continued, but maybe that's the point. Some people walk so far that the rest of us finally learn how to keep going. Last spring, I returned to Patagonia once more. Not to search, not to find, just to walk. When I reached the ridge where I'd found the backpack, the land was quiet, wildflowers had grown through the stones, and the air smelled of rain. I set the photograph down on a flat rock, weighted it with a single stone, and whispered, "You're not forgotten." Then I stood and began walking north, the opposite direction this time. Toward home. Behind me, the valley breathed. The wind rose and carried the sound of the river, steady, endless, alive. And for the first time, I realized that maybe no story ever really ends. It just changes who carries it next. Nearly a year after my final trip to Patagonia, an envelope arrived at my apartment in Istanbul. No return address, just my name, written in small, careful handwriting. Inside was a single page and a photograph of the same red backpack, this time displayed in a small glass case at the ranger's station in Chaltén. The letter read, "We decided to keep it here. Not as a memorial, but as a reminder of everyone who sets out alone, and of those who take the time to notice when someone doesn't come back." It was signed, The Rangers, Patagonia. I sat there a long time, staring at the photograph. The backpack looked ordinary, even small. But I knew the weight it had carried, the life it had contained, the story that had unfolded around it, and the silence it had left behind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how something as simple as a forgotten object could outlast the person who owned it. We live our lives assuming the world will forget us. But maybe, sometimes, it remembers, through small things. A backpack, a note, a line in a journal. And maybe that's enough. Maybe being remembered doesn't mean being known. It just means being felt, somewhere, by someone, long after we're gone. A few months later, I returned to the mountains one last time. I hiked the familiar trail alone. The wind colder now, the valley greener. When I reached the ridge, I sat down and watched the sky stretch wide and endless. In the distance, I could see the thin silver line of the river, catching the light as it moved south, and I understood. That's what EM had meant all along. Still heading south tomorrow. It wasn't about destination, it was about continuation. The quiet belief that movement itself is a kind of survival. I stayed there until the light faded. Then, as the first stars appeared, I whispered, "Safe travels." When I boarded my flight home the next day, I looked out the window as the plane lifted above the clouds. Below me, the mountains fell away, and the rivers threaded toward the sea. Still heading south, still moving, still alive. For a long time, I watched until the land disappeared. Then I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a traveler anymore. I felt like part of the road.